Okay, Common Core Algebra 1, here we go with solving equations. You're going to use factoring now. In particular, we're going to be continuing to talk about quadratic equations, and we're going to start by moving on still factoring. So we're going to factor that equation, and then the big piece we're going to look at today is applying what's called the zero product property. So first piece, some directions on how we factor an equation. We start by making sure that everything is set equal to 0, which means we have all our numbers and variables on one side of the equal sign. So here we have them to the left, and then 0 to the right side. That would be our how we separate it and set it equal to 0. Next, we're going to factor the equation completely. Now, the first thing that we have not really done much of yet, but you really need to pay attention, is that we're always going to start by seeing, is there a greatest common factor? So if there's 3 terms, do they all have a greatest common factor? If there's 2 terms, however many there is, always look for your greatest common factor first. And then if it's a trinomial, you're going to look to factor the quadratic. After that is when we apply this new piece. It's going to be called the zero product property, and that should create multiple equations. Okay, essentially what we're going to do with the zero product property is set each factor equal to 0. So after we've factored each one equal to 0, which because we have multiple equations, we're going to solve each equation independently, which means we're going to have a possibility of multiple solutions. That means we could have 2 solutions, we could have 1 solution, or we could actually have 0 solutions, which we won't see many like that, but it is always a possibility. So if we look at this, factor the equation first. We're going to talk about how we do this. Remember, we said look for your greatest common factor. A common mistake here is there's only 2 terms, but we see a squared term, and so students try to factor the trinomial like we have for the past couple of weeks. But really, we want to start with our greatest common factor. So I ask myself, what are both terms divisible by? And I see that they can both be divided by a 3, and they also both have an x. So I'm going to factor a 3x out of that binomial. 3 divided by 3 is 1, x squared divided by x is going to give me just an x, and then in the next term, 9 divided by 3 is 3, and we've already factored the x out, so I'm going to close my parentheses and set it equal to 0. Another thing to make sure that you notice too, the equals 0 part was already done for us here. If this had been some other number on the right side, if it had been equals 1, we would have had to start by getting this as a 0, and then we would have done our factor and our greatest common factor. Okay, so after we factored our equation, we said we want to apply the zero product property. And what that means is we're going to factor the equation like we did, so we get a product, meaning multiplication of linear expressions, which is what we just had, 3x times the x plus 3. Here's our product of linear expressions. And we're going to set each linear expression equal to 0. So we're essentially going to separate these two into 2 equations, which we're going to solve independent of each other. So looking at that example we already did, I've got one linear expression, 3x, so I'm going to create an equation, 3x equals 0. And then my second linear expression in the product is x plus 3, so I'm going to set that also equal to 0. Okay, so I have 2 equations here, multiple equations. I'm going to solve them independently of each other. So if I look at the left one, I divide both sides by 3 to get x by itself, and I get x equals 0. And we're done with that half. Or the other side, I need to do the same general idea of solving the equation. I want to get x by itself. I subtract 3 from both sides this time, and I get that x is equal to negative 3. And so in this case, you see multiple solutions. We created multiple equations. We got 2 solutions. So let's look at one where we start from the beginning and do the whole piece. So one thing we've done in class is the AC. We need to factor this. There is no greatest common factor. No number divides 2, 7, and negative 4 by anything. And they don't all have an x. So I'm going to do my AC product method, or we can do the loopback method that we've talked about. 2 times negative 4 gives me negative 8. And then factors of negative 8 that add up to positive 7 would be negative 1 and positive 8. Okay, now if I went through that whole process, 2x squared minus 1x plus 8x minus 4, and I did my factor by grouping. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit here to save time. But if I did by factor by grouping, I'd have a couple more steps. I'd end up with 2 factors, 2x minus 1, and then the other one would be x plus 4, and I still, another big piece, need to make sure that I bring down that equals 0 piece. That's a big piece that we can't leave out. Hey, here's where I'm now going to apply the zero product property. So I'm going to take each product. I've got 2x minus 1 and set that equal to 0. Or my other one, x plus 4, and set that equal to 0. And now I solve them independently. So I'm going to forget about the right side. I'm only going to look at the left side. I start by adding 1 to both sides. And I get 2x is equal to 1. And then I divide both sides by 2. And so I get x is equal to 1/2. And then on the other side, I'm going to subtract 4 from both sides. And I get that x is equal to -4. And that would be 2 solutions here. Okay, so there's the whole process again. Usually we do pretty well with the zero product property, but sometimes we continue to struggle with factoring. Just remember with the zero product property, we should be creating multiple equations. Most of the time we'll get 2 solutions, but we could also get 1 or 0 solutions. We'll see you next time.